What is holding you back from being the best version of yourself? That is what we will discuss today. You're listening to Raise the Anchor with your host, Melissa Burbridge, where we take you through life-changing decisions and dig deeper into those decisions to see how they affected the people that made them. All right, so welcome back, Dean. It's such a pleasure to have you back, and we're going to dig deeper into these limiting beliefs.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me back again.
Oh, our audience absolutely loved hearing your story, and I think you have a lot of value after attending one of your workshops. You taught somebody who's been taking limiting belief classes for over a year, and you taught her some new stuff. So I'm happy to be able to share that with some people. So can you just recap a little bit of your story so our audience can remember who you were?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So my corporate background, if you like, my career, I did reasonably well in sales and business development, made it to a senior position with a major company. But I never really felt fulfilled. I never felt like that's what I wanted to do. I always thought there was more to life. And I developed, even in my early life, I developed this kind of when-then mentality. So I was always looking for the next thing. When I've achieved this, then I'll be able to say I'm successful. When we live in this house or I drive this car, then I'll feel good enough. And that never arrived. Every time I set a goal and achieved it, it was like, well, but I still don't feel like that. And then I left the corporate world. I made a decision that I thought that the way to get that was to be in business for myself. So if I kind of had a similar success, but I did it for myself, then I would feel worthy and successful and good enough then. So I went into the setting up my own business. My wife and I developed a real estate business, property development and investment in the UK in the early 2000s, grew that to multi-six figures, and then lost it between 2008, 2009 in the last financial crisis. And that left us with some, financial challenges, but also a lot of issues and doubts personally about why we ended up in that situation. And then the culmination of events over the following year. So my wife and I, my youngest son, were almost killed in a car accident in March 2010. And by the end of that year, the culmination of kind of those 3 or 4 events over that period of time just left me in a position where I ended up bankrupt. We'd lost the business. And as well as the financial pressures that brought with that, it was more about, the emotional and mental stress. And I got to a point by December that year where I didn't feel like I had anything left to give, and the world and my family would be better off without me. And I took myself away on a day in December that year with the intention of taking my own life. And I didn't. What brought me back essentially was the questions. I ended up with a bit of breathing space that I didn't really know where it came from. When I made the decision, so I went to some woodland near where we lived, and I sat down and actually made a decision that I was going to take my own life. And at that point, it was almost like somebody kind of lifted everything off, all the weight, and said, look, I'll give you a few moments just to breathe without that. And it was that space that allowed me to ask some questions about why I was going through it, why I'd experienced the things I had, and more importantly, why I hadn't done some things that I perhaps would have liked to have done. And that just kind of showed me there was a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And the kind of subsequent 10 years I've spent really, developing and investing in myself, learning how a mind works, why we do the things we do, and more importantly, from business owners' perspective, why we don't do some of the things we know we should do. I didn't ever have a plan to be a coach or a speaker or anything like that. And I often talk about this idea that we're all out there looking for our purpose, but I don't think we find a purpose. I think a purpose finds us. And it kind of claimed me. It came to me about 4 or 5 years into my journey, where people just started to ask me if I would share my story. And when I shared it, people asked me if what I'd gone through, could I help them in some way? And it kind of snowballed and developed from there. And I realized that that's why I'd gone through all of those things. I had a great conversation with somebody recently, and they said that It's always important to remember that our story is not for us; it's for everybody else. It kind of just really resonated with me, that this idea that the reason I'd gone through all of those things was for other people.
Yeah, and I love that analogy. I've been living that analogy for about a year now, that your story happens to you for other people. So if you're willing to share it, it's going to impact more lives. If you keep it in, then you're not doing anybody a service.
No.
So especially those people who go through a lot of traumatic events or suffering or life-changing things, you're going to help more lives because you were saved than you are by keeping it bottled in.
Yeah. And there's two quotes, if you like, that link together for me. One is that Jim Rohn said that service to many leads to greatness. But also there's this idea that the world isn't served by you playing small, and they link together. So this whole idea is that I needed to find a way to serve many people, but also that, by keeping everything in, by being small, I couldn't serve anybody. And only when you start to share and you play a bigger game do you serve more people.
Yeah, and we're definitely happy that you didn't take your life that day, because you inspire so many to go and break down all of those blocks that block them from stepping into that greatness that they were meant to share. But I do have the question of, you started down the journey of investing in yourself to figure out what you wanted to do next. Growing up, we're always driven that we have to go to school, we have to find a path, and we have to lead that path. And investing in ourselves is something that we don't often do. We often feel guilty. So how is that for you?
Yeah, so I think, very much the same. So when I first came across, I didn't know it was called personal development. But when I first came across this idea of developing myself, it was born out of other people. Other people saw something in me and suggested that I started to read some books. But I talk a lot about this idea that when you can read books and never see what's in them. And it's not that it's not there. It's just that, you see something different in you every time you read it. So I had read some of the books that ultimately I say changed my life 3 or 4 times before I read them and actually took any action with them. And so I think that you're right. We're conditioned from a young age that, everything that we want is on the outside. It's all external things, and that certainly was the way I was. That's where that when then mentality came from. I was looking for something external. And I say often now that happiness is not something we get, it's something we are. And only when I started to look inside instead of outside did I start to realize some of those things. So, in the early stages, it was a difficult journey because, you're having to expose yourself really to some of the things that you thought were true all along, but turn out not to be. The stories we tell ourselves. I said something to somebody the other day, this idea that, I firmly believe, it was a quote that was given to me by another really successful entrepreneur in the UK. But it's so true. I repeat it often now, which is that, it's not important that other people buy our story, but it's vitally important we don't buy theirs. And growing up and even in the business world, too many times we buy other people's stories of what we should do and who we should be. And when we understand and develop our own story and the truth of that story as opposed to what we believe to be true, everything changes. And so it was a challenge in the early stages, but I was determined to find the answer to some of the questions only from my own perspective at the time. And that meant I had to put myself in some, uncomfortable and vulnerable positions in order to do that, and seek out some of those answers.
And did you ever feel guilty doing that personal development on yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I've had this conversation very recently with my wife. She's now taken on a new venture. And so she's closed one business that she had and has moved into another one full time. And she was talking about this idea that, sitting down and just reading or sitting and watching something on the screen or for an hour or out of a day she felt guilty. It was like, well, I should be doing something else. And I said to her, that's what I went through. You know, we're conditioned and told that we don't spend time on ourselves. That's being selfish. And so when we do spend time, there's this element of guilt to start with. But ultimately, you get to a point, I got to a point where I realized that if I was ever going to get to where I wanted to be, that I had to change that mindset, but also that I had to go through that process, that I had to spend time on myself. And actually, you know, in real terms, it's probably the best investment I've ever made.
Yeah. And it pushes you farther along, because if you stay in that space of not actually working on yourself, you're not giving the best version of yourself to other people. So it's
100%. It's, you know, and what happens is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It goes round and round in circles. It validates the belief we have about ourselves until we break that. And so you're right. We're unable to take the steps. And, you know, even from working with business owners, I often say that, you know, I could ask 95% of the business owners I've worked with, you know, what 3 things could you do in the next week that would change the way that your business works or take you towards the goals that you want to go towards? And they would be able to tell you. And then I say to them, well, just go and do them. And the answer is, well, that's not quite that easy. So it's, you know, it's not this, you know, most of us know what we can do or what we should do. It's getting over the things that stop us taking those actions.
Yeah. And I still, at the end of the day, I work a lot of hours as I'm building this business. And I always feel I should be spending more time with my family, but there are times that I just take the evening off and I take it for myself. I go in and I revert into myself and I learn what I need to ground myself to get through the next busy week. And yes, I still feel guilty at times that I should be spending time with my family, but I look at it in the sense that if I don't take this time in myself, how am I going to better deliver and focus when I actually do spend time with my family? I'm going to be distracted if I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we've all heard the analogy before, but if you keep emptying the cup, you can't give anything. You know, you can't give from an empty cup. The whole idea is you've got to fill it back up in order to be able to give. So in order to be present and spend time with your family, but in a meaningful way, then you need to have filled that cup beforehand.
Yeah. I always say it's the quality of time as opposed to the quantity of time that we spend together.
100%.
Yeah. And one thing I do have to learn is to get rid of my cell phone when I'm spending time with them. It is hard. During your masterclass, which was amazing, and if people are looking for a good mindset masterclass, go to Dean Fox, check out his website. You talked about the Santa Claus effect. I loved that analogy. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So it was one of those things that kind of came to me, is that, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, our belief systems, and limiting beliefs has become, you know, if you went back 5 or 6 years ago, you probably never heard of the words before, but it's the buzzword. Now everybody's talking about limiting beliefs and things like that, you know, the things that we believe about ourselves that stop us taking action. And everybody's trying to find ways to overcome or break through and all those sorts of things. And when I was looking into it, there were like loads and loads of strategies and techniques, and, you know, and I don't decry any of them because I think they all have value in their place. But everybody, you know, we're talking about neuro-linguistic programming and, you know, ETF and all sorts of things. But I always kept coming back to this idea, this concept that when we changed beliefs, when we formed them and when we changed them, we don't need all of that. We didn't need all of that stuff then. And so the Santa Claus came about from this idea that at some point in our life, you know, virtually everybody believed in Santa Claus. And at some other point in our life, we didn't believe anymore. And yet we didn't require a whole host of, you know, techniques, strategies, or NLP or counseling or therapy in order to change that belief. It happened in seconds. And as soon as it happened, we started to validate this new belief that, well, it's obviously wasn't real for all of the above reasons. And so it was that sort of, if you like, light bulb moment that I was looking at thinking, well, if it actually happened that fast and we didn't need all of that, why do we need them for everything else? If I believe something else to be true, surely we should be able to change it in the same way. And so that's where that came from, was this whole idea that we naturally change beliefs instantly when we allow the process to happen. It's just that we don't allow it for other things that we believe, and we think it's more complex and more difficult. And so, I said it on the masterclass, and I say it to my clients, change is difficult and takes a long time. It's just a belief. If we need a strategy to overcome something, then that's because we believe we need a strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
And when we don't, we don't.
Yeah, exactly. And what is your most common limiting belief that you find most business owners have?
So there's probably 3. So my top 3 are I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Is probably number 1. Number 2 is mistakes and failure are bad. And number 3 is change is difficult and takes a long time.
Yeah.
Those 3 contribute to some of the biggest behavior patterns. So they're prevalent in all 4 of the top ones that I've come across. So procrastination, perfectionism, fear of public speaking, fear of rejection. Those 3 beliefs are prevalent in all those behavior patterns. You'd be hard pressed, I believe, in my experience, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who didn't grow up with a limiting belief of either I'm not good enough or mistakes and failure are bad, just because of the way that they are developed in us. They don't come from these traumatic experiences as some beliefs do. These come from really simple interactions, usually we don't play. I don't play the blame game. It's not something that our parents meant to do. It's just the way it happened. And because they are developed so simply and easily, they are validated much easier, and therefore they last the longest. But they have, it's as a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old, believing that mistakes and failure are bad doesn't have a huge impact typically.
No. But
if you have that belief when you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s and you're trying to build a business, then they do have a major impact.
Yeah.
And so it's when they become visible to people and they start to understand that, well, this is what's stopping me taking the action that I want, that it becomes a limiting belief.
Yeah. So as you're coaching those people, what is the process like? You've discovered what their belief is, and now you're going to work on getting rid of that so that they can blossom into a new, better version of themselves. What is that process like?
So the process, it's not very complicated. It's a real simple process that I've kind of learned and developed to a point where it work. I've got it to a point where it works 100% of the time. If you follow the process through 100% of the time, I guarantee it works. And it's real in simple steps. We're looking for what was the cause. So, and again, we're not looking for an individual incident. So it's not like it's not like timeline therapy where we're saying, right, we want to find one incident where this might have happened. It's understanding where they came from. So the types of occurrences, the types of interactions that would lead to that type of belief. So finding that. The second thing then is understanding that it wasn't the event that caused it in the first place, but the way that we interpreted those events. And then that leads us into talking about this idea, this concept that events don't have any inherent meaning. And that's something that, if somebody says to me, what one thing would you like to teach the world that you think would have the biggest impact in their lives? It would be that events have no meaning. If people really understood that, and I don't mean on an intellectual level, but if they really took that to heart and understood it on a deep enough level, 90% of the things that we think affect us wouldn't affect us anymore. So I try and really work on getting them to understand that, beyond an intellectual level. And then it's really about re-looking at the event with these new eyes and this new awareness to say, well, actually, was it the event that caused that then? And when people understand that it wasn't, it was just an interpretation, then you're free to change the interpretation. And we'll do that. We'll get them to change the interpretation and see how it changes the feeling. Because the problem with beliefs is that what tends to happen often is intellectually, and I've done this with business owners, intellectually people can say to me, that doesn't affect me, I don't have that belief. But subconsciously they do. So even though consciously they will look at the belief, the statement, and say, yeah, that can't affect me because I've done this or I've done that, and therefore that can't be true. When you ask the question, and the way I ask it is always, But does that feel true? On some level, does it feel as if that's true? Do you tend to act as if it's true on most occasions? The answer to that is 99 times out of 100 is a yes, I do. And I've had, 7-figure business owners who have even said yes. Sometimes they've said yes, that affects me, and I'll say, okay, I want you to say it out loud. I want you to know what it feels like when you say those words, and they can't bring themselves to say it because the emotional connection to that belief is so strong. And what we're looking to do is to break it to a point where you can say the words without any emotional connection. So I have an example I use with people where we'll get them to say something which is they know 100% is not true. And I usually have a bit of fun with this. So I'll get them to say something like, I'm a giraffe, or, the grass is pink, or something they know is definitely not true. And I ask them how that makes them feel. And they'll say, well, nothing. I don't feel anything. Or they might say, it makes me feel a bit stupid if I say I'm a giraffe. And I'm like, okay, because you know that that's not true. But now say something that you think is true about yourself and tell me how it feels. So there's a complete difference between how that feels. And so that's a test we use. And then we use the same test at the end. When we've gone through the process, we'll retest it and say, how does it feel now? Well, it doesn't feel anything. It doesn't feel true at all. And sometimes I'll have people say, it feels like a weight's been lifted off my shoulders, or it feels like, something like a mirror's just broken and it's clear. And there's all sorts of emotional attachment to it. But the process is in essence is really simple. It's where did it come from? How did it get there? How did you interpret to be that? Did you really see that? Is that the truth? Or is it just one potential truth of that situation? If it wasn't what you saw, what did you see? And then if you interpreted it differently, how would that make you feel? And then, okay, so now let's review it. Does it make you feel that way? Is it true? And like I said, you follow the process through end to end, 100% of the time, it's not true.
Wow. And I love your thought process that an event isn't the issue. So explain that the event doesn't hold it.
Okay, so if any event whatsoever, whether that's a situation, a person, something somebody said, the weather, whatever it was, if a particular event had an inherent meaning, it meant something, then we would all interpret it the same way. We would all get the same meaning from it. And that's not true. We don't. Some people experience the same event and feel differently about it. And so I use a very basic example. If there was a particular event, it could only have one meaning if the meaning was in the event. So if we took rain as an example, which is one I use often, rain's an event. If we took a scenario and said, you're planning an outdoor event, and you've spent a long time planning it, the weather leading up to the event, the day of the event's been amazing, and on the day of the event, it's pouring down, it's raining. Is rain good or bad? And most people will say, well, it's bad because I can't, host the event. And then you say, okay, so let's take the same event, rain. But what if you had a farm and it hadn't rained for several months and you're in danger of losing your crops and livelihood and it starts to rain? Would rain be good or bad? Well, it would be good. Okay. And if it was raining and we were inside, having a conversation like this on a podcast, what is rain good or bad? Well, it's neither. It's outside. It doesn't make any difference. Okay. But it's the same event. So how can the same event be good, bad, and indifferent? It can't. It's impossible. The only way it can do that is because it's not the event that has the meaning, but the way we interpret the event. And so that's what leads to our belief is the interpretation of events that happen in our life, not the events themselves. And when you understand that, not only do I use that as part of the process we use for breaking and eliminating beliefs, but also I use it in everyday scenarios. Every time something happens, it's an event, and you can choose how you interpret that event.
Which I absolutely love that.
Yeah, and it's a really simple, quick, and efficient way to be able to break the effect that an event can have that sometimes could last minutes, hours, days, or even weeks.
Yeah. During the masterclass, when you were mentioning that, it was like the biggest light bulb moment. And I've done a lot of limiting beliefs or breaking down the barrier kind of teachings, but that one literally just changed everything.
Yeah. It's a huge shift. And that's why I say, if people say to me, what one thing, if you could teach one thing and everybody really got it, it would be that, because it's life changing when you get it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have something exciting coming up in April, and what is that?
So we've got a new kind of group program, which is called Crack the Code, which is designed on the back of the masterclasses. It's designed to take entrepreneurs and business owners who are suffering from one of those four major behavior patterns that we talked about. So procrastination, perfectionism, fear of public speaking, or fear of rejection. And what I discovered was that, first of all, each of those patterns of behavior has a specific set of limiting beliefs that support that pattern of behavior. So we talked in the masterclass about a concept called the Jenga concept, this idea that it supports it like wooden blocks does. But I also discovered that each of us has our own unique code. So we don't all have all the same. So, if we took procrastination as an example, there are 19 of them that support that tower. We don't all have all 19. We have different combinations. So it's like kind of cracking the code, breaking into a safe. Everybody has a different combination. And when I discovered that, it meant two things. One is that, well, okay, instead of working on all 19, if we just work on the ones that affect an individual, then we can have a faster impact. And we can get people into action much quicker if we're working towards a particular goal. So the program was designed to compress the time that it takes to have huge results and shifts in mindset. And so we put together this program so that we can work. It's a bit of a hybrid. It's kind of a bit of a group and some one-to-one support as well. And it's designed to be able to kind of get people through in less than 45 days to, taking massive action and having, getting huge results and making what I call quantum leaps and changes, as opposed to kind of these small step forward all the time. And in all the stuff we've tested, all the clients I've worked with in the previous up to this point, we've had people make massive shifts in short spaces of time. And like I said, the whole idea of the Santa Claus was that this idea that it should only take minutes. It doesn't need lots of extended strategies and therapy and counseling to get to where we need to be. It's really quick and sharp. And that's what it's about. That's what the program's about, is to get people into action as fast as we possibly can.
So what are the type of people you're looking to get into this program?
So the people we normally work with, I never restrict industry. Simply because, in working with the people I've worked with people from all sorts of backgrounds. So I've worked with some athletes, so pro sports. I've worked with authors. I've worked with other speakers and coaches. I've worked with digital entrepreneurs. I've worked with people who own online businesses, right through to real estate professionals and other traditional bricks and mortar businesses. So it's not restricted to businesses in any particular industry, but it is restricted to people who are the business owner or the entrepreneur. So the CEO or the founder or the entrepreneur. And it's those people who are usually in two stages of their business journey. They're either already building a business, but are struggling to get the results they want. Even though they know what actions to take, they're just not taking them. They're putting off on a regular basis taking the action that's going to get them to where they want to be. So that's one aspect. Or they've got to a point in their business where, a bit like I did, where they feel like, but I should feel successful. I should feel like I've got everything that I need, but I don't feel fulfilled. Why is that? I'm missing something. And often I'm working with those to look at things in a slightly different perspective. But it's usually in those two kind of aspects of their journey. But without doubt, it's business owners and CEOs and founders and entrepreneurs who are struggling with one of those four key issues. So a fear of public speaking, a fear of rejection, perfectionism, or procrastination, which procrastination is probably the biggest one that I've come across so far. But one of those four, then, our program's a great fit for that.
Awesome. And what is your goal that you would like to achieve with this group program? Do you want to make a massive impact? Do you want to run this program often? Or is it like a one-time program and we'll see where we go from there?
No, the plan is to really kind of to grow it. We want to have a, I'm not. I think I talked about this in the masterclass. It's not that I want to impact, millions of people's lives. I don't want a statement. I want to have a very specific impact. I want to impact, 1,000 people in the next year or two, and I want to impact 5,000 people over the next 5 years. And the reason I people will say, well, you're not thinking big enough. But the reason that I want to be as focused as that is that I know that the impact of this program, the ripple effect of that on the people that they know and the people around them and the lives of their family and friends and work contacts, will probably have that sort of impact anyway. So yeah, it's, we do want to, it'll be an ongoing program. We do want to grow it, but with a very specific idea of impacting those businesses, because the ripple effect of that will be huge.
No, I love that goal. And I love that it isn't as big as you could make it, because then you're really laser focusing on those specific people. I think far too often as business owners who are trying to make a big impact in the world, we try and do those outrageous numbers. And then we forget that we should really be focusing on the impact that we're making. So even my goal, as I drop a program, isn't to necessarily change millions of lives. It's to change a certain amount of lives, because like you said, that ripple effect will go out and they can then change the world.
For sure. And it's, we said earlier on, didn't we, when we first started, about this idea that service to many leads to greatness. But for me, it's not serving millions of people. It's serving those people to a level that they can then go and serve. And that's where we have this kind of huge impact, I believe.
Yeah. And I often see a lot of coaches give people tools and then they never see of them again. So I give you all these tools and you do a little bit of work and then I'm not going to see you again. Do you follow up with everybody that you coach? Do you touch base and see what's going on?
Yeah, so normally, if we took the program that we're talking about at the minute, it's typically over 45 days. There's two versions of it. There's a version that people can just get access to all of the online content for that. And then there's the one that includes my support. But either of those, whichever way they go, they still have access to a private community where they can stay in. That's lifetime access. They can stay in there. I'm in and out of there. They can ask questions. Post them in there and I'll be able to answer and support. So I really want to get this out. And that's why I didn't want to have this idea of, well, we'll have 1 million people, because I can't serve them. I want to serve people to a level where, they're investing in themselves the same way I did. And on the basis of that, we're able to get them the results that they want so that they can then serve in whichever way they plan to, the community that they're looking to support.
And see, that's why I like following you, because you're kind of like in the same mindset as, if I'm going to give you these tools, I want to make sure that those tools actually work. And I want to see how you grow and progress from there. I'm not one of those coaches that can coach 1 million people and not see the effect. I'm not in it for the money. I'm in it for the change and impact.
For sure. And that, I think I use a line often where I say that, there's too much shelf development for me. People buy programs or buy books and they sit on the shelf. They don't do anything with them. It's like, well, yeah. I had a conversation with somebody the other day about, what books have changed your life. It was actually in a clubhouse room. And I talked about Think and Grow Rich being a book that changed my life. And someone had said, oh, I've read that. And I said, did it have the impact that you were anticipating? And they were like, well, not really. And I said, and how many times have you read it? And they were like, well, once. And I was like, okay, and have you done anything with it? Did you take any action with any of the information that came out of it? No, I don't think so. And I'm like, well, then it wouldn't have an impact. I've been Think and Grow Rich as an example. I've been reading that book ever since December 2010, every day virtually. And there are days, I just sat with my wife this morning for half an hour where we picked up, a plan that we've been building and reviewed it and said, it's a little bit out of date and there's actually some things changed. But that all came from, implementing stuff that came out of Think and Grow Rich. So people talk about this idea that, I didn't change my life. And I'm like, well, have you done anything with it? Or is it just sitting on the shelf?
Yeah, no, I fully believe that. And I believe that sometimes, like you said, each time you read a book, it can have a different impact. It can have a different meaning. There's one that I've read 4 or 5 times. It's by Rachel Hollis. And each time I've read it, there's been a different meaning. And it's also been a different stage in my life.
Yeah.
So I may have implemented some things one time, but I implement a whole new different thing the different time. So I love that mentality.
One of the, in the clubhouse room, we've talked about, one of my tips is that I have, if you look on my bookshelf, there's probably about half a dozen copies of Think and Grow Rich. But I have a copy that I've had since 2010 that I've made notes in. I've highlighted things, I've made notes in the margins and all sorts of things. But I've also got a copy, an identical copy of the same book, which is clean. It doesn't have any notes in. And sometimes I'll just sit and read the clean copy so that I'm not kind of rereading my own notes. Mm-hmm. And I get something different. I'll go back to the noted copy to say, did I pick that up last time? Because I don't remember that.
Yeah. No, I fully believe in reading a book more than once. My husband's just getting into reading books, and he'll read the book once and he'll make some changes. And I'm like, well, are you going to go back and read that ever again? And he's like, I don't know. I think I got from it what I think I should. I'm like, no, you have to change your mindset and go back and read it again and see what appears.
Yeah. You read it, like you say, I always say you don't see anything in the book that wasn't there before, but you'll see things in yourself that weren't there when you read it last time. Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you could give advice to anybody at looking at shifting their mindset, what would it be?
It probably goes back to my number one thing. If they could understand that events have no inherent meaning, on a deep enough level, you wouldn't be impacted by 90% of the things that you think are causing problems right now.
Yeah. And so where can our listeners follow your journey?
Okay, so they can find me. My website's deanafox.com or deanfoxcoaching.com. Either of those will get them there. And I'm on most of the social platforms, so Facebook and Instagram and Clubhouse, which are all at Dean Fox Coaching.
Awesome. And who inspires you? I want to see if you give a different answer this time.
Who inspires me? It's always a difficult question because I have so many people that kind of I've come across. My wife inspires me every day. I think, her transition from who she believed she was to who she is now is night and day. And she's still always looking to progress and be better. My younger brother inspires me amazingly. He's somebody who followed a dream against everyone else's kind of advice, including mine. So, he's younger than me. When I was in the corporate world and he was following his dream, I was saying to him, how long are you going to do this for? And, when's the time to make a decision to say, I'm going to give up? Or, so even in against my advice, he persevered and said, no, I'm going to keep going. And then when I started to get into this and I helped share some other stuff with him, I started to realize some things, but he also then kicked on from there and has gone on to have huge success. And so he inspires me all the time. My 2 sons inspire me because they're following their dream. And then I think, I suppose outside of my family, who are huge inspirations to me, who inspires me the most? That's a really tough question, I think.
I know it can be a really tough question at times because for myself, it depends on what phase of life I'm in as to who inspires me at that moment.
Yeah, but I think if I was to look at, for example, film. So I like films, movies, and you've got people like Will Smith and stuff like that. But I think Denzel Washington, I absolutely love, not just because I think he's a phenomenal actor, but when you hear him speak outside of his acting, he's such a kind of reflective and thoughtful person in terms of thinking about what he says before he says it. That I'm always inspired by the fact that he is so open to sharing his knowledge and information, as is Jim Carrey. Who also inspires me because I think he's done wonders, not just from an acting perspective, but also in terms of where he's taken his own personal journey.
No, that's beautiful. I love it. So people wanting to get into your Crack the Code course, how can they reach you? Is it through your social channels, or is there specific?
So they can reach me through the social channels, or they can, if they wanted to come along to the masterclass, they can go to, there's a section on my website for events and speaking, and the event details are in there. Or they can just reach out to me on social, and I can provide the details for them and have a chat with them.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you back and dig deeper into those limiting beliefs.
It's been a pleasure always.
Thank you for listening to Raise the Anchor, brought to you by Alizé Creative Solutions. We hope you found that story very inspiring. We look forward to bringing you more week. Subscribe to the podcast to stay in the loop. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review to spread the love even further. We hope you have smooth sailing.